The Galactic Council Chamber had seen many declarations of war over the past 10,000 years. Ancient species had risen and fallen within these walls. Empires had been born and extinguished while the Council watched and recorded. But in all that time, no announcement had been delivered with such absolute certainty as the one spoken by Admiral of the Draconian Empire on that fateful day. He stood at the central podium, his scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights, his yellow eyes scanning the assembled representatives with contempt. The Draconians were the greatest military power in 3 galaxies. Their fleet numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Their warriors had never known defeat in over 2,000 years of conquest. And now they had set their sights on a small blue world called Earth. "The humans have refused integration," announced, his voice carrying the weight of death itself. "They have refused tribute. They have insulted our ambassadors and rejected our generous terms. In accordance with Draconian law, they will be cleansed from existence. 12,000 warships will descend upon their world. By this time next cycle, humanity will be nothing but ash and memory." The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Many of them had traded with the humans. Some had even developed a strange fondness for the peculiar species. Humans were friendly. They asked questions constantly. They seemed genuinely interested in learning about other cultures and technologies, but they were also young. Their space program was barely 2 centuries old. Their defensive fleet was laughable by galactic standards. No one spoke in their defense. No one dared. 300 light-years away, Commander Daniel stood aboard the reconnaissance vessel Horizon's Edge and watched the Draconian armada gathering at the edge of the Sol system. His ship was small and fast, designed for observation rather than combat. It had been hiding in the shadow of a captured asteroid for the past 6 days, recording every movement of the enemy fleet. The numbers were terrifying. 12,000 warships stretched across the void like a swarm of metal locusts. Battle cruisers the size of small moons drifted alongside sleek destroyer packs. Carrier vessels disgorged thousands of fighter craft that moved in perfect formation. Supply ships carried enough ordnance to burn 100 worlds. "Sir, I have confirmed the count," Lieutenant Morgan said from her communications station. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she worked. 12,347 combat vessels, 8.2 million crew members. They will reach Earth's orbit in approximately 71 hours. Daniel nodded slowly. He had served in the fleet for 25 years. He had seen skirmishes with pirates and border disputes with minor alien races, but nothing had prepared him for this. Earth's entire defensive fleet numbered less than 300 ships. Their orbital stations were barely operational. By every calculation he could make, humanity would be extinct within 3 days. He turned to his pilot, a young man named Cole who had joined the crew only 6 months earlier. "Take us to minimum safe distance and prepare a tight beam transmission to Earth Command. They need to know what is coming." The message traveled at the speed of light across the vast emptiness of space. It arrived at Earth Command headquarters in Geneva 17 hours later, decoded and by a dozen security protocols. Admiral Cole read it in her private office, her weathered face betraying nothing as her eyes moved across the words. She was 73 years old. She had served humanity her entire adult life. She had buried a husband and 2 children. She had watched nations rise and fall. She had kept secrets that would shatter the minds of ordinary people. And now, at the end of her career, she faced the moment she had been preparing for since she was a young lieutenant. The Draconians were coming. There would be no negotiation, no mercy, no hope through conventional means. She pressed a button on her desk and spoke to her aide. "Send Captain Brooks to my office immediately." Arrived within minutes. He was a tall man in his early 40s, handsome in a rough sort of way, with gray already touching his temples. He had served under for 15 years. He knew her moods and her methods, but he had never seen her look quite like this before. "Close the door," she said quietly. What I am about to tell you does not leave this room. If you repeat it to anyone without authorization, you will be executed. Do you understand?" Nodded, his throat felt dry. Stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city of Geneva continued its normal routine. People walked to work. Children played in parks. Couples held hands and laughed at private jokes. None of them knew that death was racing toward them across the stars. "Have you ever heard of Protocol Omega-7?" she asked. Frowned. The name stirred something in his memory. A rumor he had heard years ago during officer training. A joke that senior commanders made when discussing impossible scenarios. He had always assumed it was a myth. "It is not a myth," said, reading his expression. "It is very real, and you are going to help me activate it." She turned and looked him directly in the eyes. In that moment, saw something he had never seen in his commanding officer before. It was not fear. It was not hope. It was certainty. The absolute unshakable certainty of someone who held a winning hand in a game where everyone else thought she had already lost. "The Draconians believe we are primitive," continued. "They believe our technology is centuries behind theirs. They believe this will be a simple extermination mission, completed in days, barely worth mentioning in their history books." She smiled then, and the smile was cold enough to freeze the blood. "They have no idea what we have been building." Across the planet, in locations that appeared on no map and existed in no official record, facilities that had been dormant for decades suddenly hummed to life. In Nevada, in Siberia, in the Australian outback, in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, teams of scientists and engineers emerged from hidden bunkers. They had trained their entire lives for this moment. Many of them had never seen sunlight in years. They had sacrificed everything, including their very existence, for a secret that humanity had guarded since 1947. Dr. Christopher Lane stood in the control room of the Nevada Black Site and watched his monitors flicker with data that conventional physics. The power readings alone were impossible according to everything the galaxy knew about science. But they were not impossible for humans. Humans had a way of doing impossible things when survival demanded it. The Draconians had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that a young species was a weak species. They had confused simplicity with stupidity and kindness with vulnerability. They were about to learn the truth. And the truth would destroy them all. The Draconian fleet moved through space with the confidence of absolute predators. Supreme Commander L stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched the blue marble of Earth grow larger in the viewing screens. It was a beautiful world, he admitted to himself, rich in water and minerals. The atmosphere was nearly perfect for colonization after the cleansing was complete. His tactical officers had reported no significant resistance forming. The human fleet remained clustered around there, in a defensive formation that would have been laughable if it was not so pathetic. 300 ships against 12,000. It was not even worth calling a battle. It would be a slaughter, quick and efficient, and then the Draconian Empire would add another conquered world to its ever-growing territory. "How long until we reach optimal firing range?" L asked his navigation officer. 47 hours, Supreme Commander. We could accelerate and arrive sooner, but there is no need to waste fuel on such inferior opponents. L nodded in agreement. Let the humans watch death approaching. Let them understand the hopelessness of their situation. Let them spend their final hours in terror and despair. It was a small pleasure, but he enjoyed it nonetheless. What L did not know, what no Draconian could possibly imagine, was that humanity's true defense had nothing to do with the ships floating in orbit around Earth. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that had been carved out of solid granite over 60 years ago, Dr. Price worked alongside her team of 200 scientists and engineers. The facility was called Site 7, though it officially did not exist. It appeared on no government budget. Its workers had no public identity. As far as the rest of the world knew, Price had died in a car accident in 1989. She was 64 years old now. Her hair had turned completely white. Her eyes carried the weight of decades spent underground, away from sunlight and fresh air and everything that made life worth living. But her mind was sharper than ever, and her hands remained steady as she calibrated the final targeting systems. The technology she worked with had not been invented by humans. It had arrived on Earth in 1947, carried by a vessel that crashed in the desert of New Mexico. The being inside had died on impact, its body recovered by military personnel before anyone else could reach the site. The ship itself had been damaged beyond repair, but its components had been preserved. For 78 years, the minds in human history had studied those components. They had reverse-engineered propulsion systems that bent the laws of physics. They had decoded energy sources that made nuclear power look like striking two stones together. They had uncovered weapons technology so devastating that even the species who built them had been afraid to use it. The governments of Earth had agreed on only one thing during those decades of secret work. The technology must remain hidden until humanity truly needed it. Revealing it too early would invite attention from the galaxy, attention that Earth was not ready to handle. But now the attention had come anyway, and now Earth was ready. Lieutenant Commander Peters sat in a communication hub buried beneath the Swiss Alps. His job was to coordinate messages between 12 black sites spread across the planet. Each site controlled a different piece of the weapons system that had been decades in the making. Separately, they were impressive scientific achievements. Together, they formed something that no species in the galaxy had ever witnessed. Site 3 reports full power, he announced into his headset. Site 7 confirms targeting systems online. Site 12 has completed satellite alignment. On the other end of the line, Admiral Cole listened and checked off items on a list that only 3 people in the world were authorized to see. Everything was proceeding according to schedule. The Draconians had given them just enough time to prepare. On the lunar surface, hidden beneath a facade of abandoned mining equipment, Colonel Palmer activated the array. He was the only human being permanently stationed on the moon, living in a secret bunker that had been constructed in 1986 under the cover of a scientific research program. His family believed he had died during a classified mission 10 years ago. His wife had. His children had grown up without him. He had accepted these sacrifices without complaint. This moment was what everything had been building toward. 300 satellites, disguised as space debris for decades, began repositioning themselves into a precise geometric pattern. They moved slowly, using tiny bursts of compressed gas to avoid detection. To any observer, they would appear to be nothing more than random chunks of metal drifting through orbit. But their true purpose was about to be revealed. Colonel Palmer opened a channel to Earth Command. "Array is online and awaiting your command, Admiral." Cole stood in the center of the Geneva command bunker, surrounded by screens showing data from every black site on the planet. Her staff worked in silence, each person focused entirely on their assigned task. There was no panic, no fear. They had trained for this scenario 1,000 times in simulation. Now they would execute it for real. She thought about her twin boys, 7 years old, who lived with their mother in California. They had no idea what their grandmother really did. They thought she was a boring bureaucrat who pushed papers in an office somewhere. They would never know the truth. No one outside the program would ever know. She thought about every human who had ever lived and died on that pale blue dot floating in the darkness, every farmer who had tilled the soil, every artist who had created beauty from nothing, every child who had laughed and played and dreamed of the future. All of their hopes and struggles and achievements came down to this single moment. The Draconian fleet was now 36 hours from optimal range. They had slowed down even further, savoring their approach, confident in their victory. Checked her instruments one final time. Power levels were at maximum. Targeting systems had locked onto every enemy vessel. The satellites had completed their formation. The black sites were synchronized and ready. She picked up the communication device and spoke clearly into it. Her voice did not waver. Her hands did not shake. "All stations, this is Admiral Cole. You are authorized to fire on my command. May God forgive us for what we are about to do." She paused for exactly 3 seconds. Then she gave the order that would change the universe forever. "Fire!" The sky above Earth turned white. Every satellite in the array discharged simultaneously. Every black site released its stored energy into the network. The planet itself seemed to shudder as forces beyond human comprehension were unleashed into the void of space. And 12,000 Draconian warships discovered, in the final moments of their existence, that humanity had never been primitive at all. They had simply been waiting. No species in recorded galactic history had ever harnessed zero-point energy as a weapon. The theoretical mathematics had been studied by 1,000 civilizations over millions of years. Every single one of them had reached the same conclusion. It was impossible. The energy requirements alone would drain a star. The containment systems would need to be built from materials that did not exist. The Galactic Council had dismissed the concept ago as nothing more than an interesting thought experiment. Humanity had solved the equation in 1987. It had taken 40 years of secret research. 300 scientists had worked on the project in complete isolation. 17 of them had died from accidents during the testing phase. Their names were inscribed on a memorial wall in Site 7, honored by no one except the colleagues who remembered them. The breakthrough had come from a young physicist named, who had noticed a pattern in the alien equations that everyone else had overlooked. She had been working for 18 hours straight, running on coffee and determination, when the answer suddenly appeared in her mind like a light switching on in a dark room. The energy did not need to come from a star. It could be drawn from the fabric of spacetime itself, pulled from the quantum foam that existed beneath the surface of reality. The containment problem could be solved by not containing the energy at all, but rather by channeling it directly into a focused beam that would exist for only a fraction of a second. Had spent another 2 years refining her discovery. She had died of cancer in 2003, never knowing if her work would actually be used. But she had left behind complete blueprints, tested, and for the most devastating weapon the universe had ever seen. Now that weapon was firing. The beam that erupted from Earth's surface was not a laser. It was not plasma. It was not any form of energy that conventional physics could describe. It was the fundamental fabric of spacetime itself, twisted and compressed into a lance of pure annihilation. It traveled at the speed of causality, faster than light, faster than thought, reaching across 36 hours of distance in less than a heartbeat. It struck the Draconian fleet with absolute precision. Supreme Commander L had exactly 0.003 seconds to register surprise before his flagship ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, simply erased from reality. One moment the Eternal Dominion was there, 8 kilometers of armored hull and advanced weapons systems, crewed by 40,000 of the finest warriors in the Draconian Empire. The next moment there was nothing, not even debris, not even atoms. The ship had been removed from existence as completely as if it had never been built. The first wave took 4,000 ships in less than a heartbeat. The beams swept across the fleet in a pattern calculated by computers that had been running scenarios for 3 decades. Battle cruisers vanished. Destroyers disappeared. Carrier vessels and their fighter complements were wiped away like chalk marks erased from a board. The Draconians who survived the initial strike attempted to scatter. They tried to flee in every direction, their captains screaming orders into communication systems that were suddenly filled with nothing but static. They tried to send warning messages back to the Empire, desperate to let their people know what had happened, to tell them that Earth was not what they thought, that humans were something terrible and wrong. But the array had created a localized disruption field around the entire solar system. No faster-than-light communication could escape. No warp drives would function. The Draconian fleet was trapped, isolated, alone with the monster they had awakened. Captain Tor stood on the bridge of the USS Valiant and watched in stunned silence as humanity's hidden weapons continued their work. She had served in the fleet for 12 years. She had trained for combat against alien forces. She had accepted that she might die defending her. She had never imagined anything like this. Beside her, Lieutenant Benjamin Shaw recorded everything, his fingers moving automatically across his console, while his mind struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. He was the official historian assigned to the Valiant, responsible for documenting whatever battle might occur. He had expected to record a heroic last stand, a desperate defense against overwhelming odds, humanity going down fighting rather than surrendering. Instead, he was watching something that would give him nightmares for the rest of his life. The second wave was more surgical than the first. Individual targeting systems, developed by Dr. Christopher Lane's team at Site 7, locked onto engine signatures across the scattered fleet. Ships that tried to flee found their propulsion systems simply gone, replaced by vacuum. They drifted helplessly in the void, their crews alive but powerless, watching as death approached from every direction. The third wave reduced them to atoms. In 17 minutes, 12,000 Draconian warships were eliminated. Not defeated, not damaged, eliminated. 8.2 million crew members died without ever seeing what killed them, without ever understanding how a species they considered primitive had developed technology that made their own weapons look like children's toys. Earth's conventional fleet never fired a single shot. Admiral Cole watched the final data streams come in from the array. Her face showed no emotion. Her hands remained steady at her sides. She had done what was necessary. She had saved her species from extinction. She had committed the largest single act of killing in recorded human history. She wondered if she would ever sleep peacefully again. In Site 7, Dr. Price powered down the targeting systems and leaned back in her chair. Her team sat in exhausted silence around her. Some of them were crying. Others simply stared at their screens with blank expressions, unable to process what they had just participated in. "It worked," someone whispered. Nodded slowly. Yes, it had worked. Decades of sacrifice and secrecy had paid off exactly as planned. Humanity would survive. Earth would remain free. The children of Earth would grow up and have children of their own, generation after generation, stretching into a future that had seemed impossible just 24 hours ago. She should have felt triumph. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt hollow, emptied out, like something essential had been removed from her soul and would never return. On the lunar surface, Colonel Palmer shut down the array and sat alone in his bunker, staring at the wall. He had not spoken to another human being in person for 10 years. He had given up everything for this moment. His family, his identity, his connection to the world he had just helped save. Was it worth it? He did not know. He suspected he would never know. But humanity was alive. That was what mattered. That was all that mattered. The Draconian fleet was gone, erased from existence as completely as if it had never crossed the border into human space. No survivors would return home to tell the story. No distress signals would reach the Empire. The galaxy would wonder what had happened to the greatest invasion force ever assembled. And Earth would keep its secrets, as it always had. The truth was too terrible to share. The Galactic Council received no signals from the Draconian fleet. For 3 days they waited. For 3 weeks they sent probe after probe toward the Sol system, trying to understand what had happened. For 3 months they debated and argued and theorized, but no answer came that made any sense. 12,000 ships had vanished. Over 8 million Draconian warriors had disappeared. The greatest military force assembled in 2,000 years had crossed into human space and simply ceased to exist. Ambassador Ra of the Concordat reviewed the data in her private chambers, her 4 eyes scanning the reports with growing horror. They were an ancient species, one of the founding members of the Galactic Council. They had observed countless civilizations rise and fall. They had developed a certain instinct for danger, a sense for species that were more than they appeared. She had felt that instinct the first time she met a human ambassador 15 years ago. There was something wrong about them, something she could never quite define. They smiled too easily. They cooperated too willingly with every request. They asked too many questions about galactic weapons technology while revealing nothing of their own capabilities. The Council had dismissed her concerns. Humans were young, barely out of their cradle. Their technology was primitive. They posed no threat to anyone. Now Ra understood what her instincts had been trying to tell her. She wrote a classified report to the High Command, recommending that all contact with humanity be conducted with extreme caution. She suggested that no vessel should ever enter human space without explicit invitation. She proposed that every human request for technology transfer be indefinitely. The High Command received her report and filed it away without comment. They were not ready to believe that a species so young could be so dangerous. They would learn, eventually. They all would. On Earth, the celebrations were muted. There were no parades, no public announcements, no speeches declaring victory over the alien invaders. The people of Earth did not even know how close they had come to extinction. They had been told that a diplomatic crisis had been resolved peacefully, that the Draconian fleet had withdrawn after negotiations, that there was nothing to worry about. Only a few hundred people knew the truth, and they had been sworn to secrecy under penalty of death. Admiral Cole stood before the United Nations Security Council in a closed session, explaining what had been done in humanity's name. The representatives listened in silence, their faces pale, their hands trembling as they took notes that would be destroyed before they left the room. The technology will remain classified at the highest level, told them. The black sites will return to their dormant state. Officially, the Draconian fleet suffered a catastrophic navigation error that sent them into the sun. That is the story we will tell the galaxy. That is the story we will tell our own people. No one outside this room will ever know what really happened. A representative from China raised his hand. What if they come back? What if another species decides to attack us? Met his eyes without flinching. Then we will do it again, and again, as many times as necessary. We have proven that humanity can defend itself against any threat in the galaxy. That is our strength. Our secrecy is our shield. As long as no one knows what we can do, no one will risk finding out. The Council voted unanimously to accept her plan. They had no other choice. Dr. Price returned to Site 7 and began working on the next generation of defenses. The zero-point weapon had performed exactly as designed, but she had already identified 17 potential improvements. She had seen the intelligence reports gathered by human spies throughout the galaxy. The Draconians were not the only predators out there. Some species were older and more powerful, with technologies that even the crashed vessel from 1947 had not contained. Earth needed to be ready for all of them. She assembled a new team, younger scientists who would continue the work long after she was gone. She shared everything she knew, holding nothing back, passing on decades of knowledge to minds that were hungry to learn. The work would never stop. The preparation would never end. Humanity had survived its first real test, but there would be others. Commander Daniel was promoted to admiral and given command of a newly commissioned vessel called the USS Defiance. His mission was classified at the highest level, known only to Cole and a handful of senior officials. He would patrol the borders of human space, watching for threats, gathering intelligence, ensuring that no species ever caught Earth off guard again. His methods would be his own. His authority would be absolute. He would operate in the shadows, a ghost among the stars, protecting a that would never know his name. Lieutenant Morgan transferred to intelligence, assigned to a division that officially did not exist. Her skills in communications and languages made her valuable in ways that her previous commanders had never appreciated. She would spend the next decade infiltrating galactic information networks, learning every secret the Council tried to hide, building a web of contacts and agents that spanned 1,000 worlds. She missed her family sometimes. She missed the simple pleasures of normal life. But she understood that someone had to do this work. Someone had to keep watch, and she was willing to sacrifice her happiness for the safety of her species. The Draconian Empire demanded answers from the Galactic Council. Their emperor himself attended a special session, his scales flushed with rage, his voice shaking with fury as he demanded to know what had happened to his invasion fleet. 12,000 ships did not simply disappear. 8 million warriors did not simply cease to exist. But there were no answers to give. No survivors had returned. No escape pods had been recovered. No wreckage had been found. The probes sent to investigate had detected nothing but empty space where the fleet should have been. It was as if 12,000 ships had never existed at all. Some Draconian officials proposed a second invasion, a larger force that would succeed where the first had failed. But cooler heads prevailed. Whatever had destroyed the fleet might still be waiting out there. Sending more ships could mean losing more ships. The risk was too great. The Empire officially declared the Sol system a forbidden zone. No Draconian vessel would ever enter human space again. The loss was recorded as a mysterious anomaly, an unexplained tragedy, a wound that would never fully heal. Ambassador Gregory Palmer, a young diplomat from New Zealand who had been assigned to the Council just 6 months before the invasion, watched the Draconians accept their defeat with quiet satisfaction. His father had died in the preparation of Earth's defenses, killed in an accident at one of the black sites when Gregory was just a child. He had grown up knowing that his father was a hero, but never knowing why. Now he understood. He smiled at the Draconian ambassador across the council chamber, the same easy smile that all humans seem to wear. The ambassador looked away quickly, something like fear flickering in his ancient eyes. Good, Gregory thought. Let them be afraid. Let them all be afraid. Humanity had earned that fear, and humanity would use it. 50 years passed like water flowing through an endless river. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Draconian Empire, crippled by the unexplained loss of their invasion fleet, had fractured into a dozen warring factions. Without the psychological dominance of their undefeated military, their subject worlds had risen in rebellion. Their economy had collapsed. Their emperor had been assassinated by his own advisors, who blamed him for the disaster at Earth. By the time stability returned to Draconian space, they were no longer a major power. They had become just another species struggling to survive in a hostile universe, their dreams of galactic conquest reduced to dusty memories and bitter regrets. The Galactic Council watched humanity with a mixture of fear and fascination during those 50 years. The humans continued to expand, slowly and carefully, colonizing new worlds within a region they called the Terran Sphere. They traded with anyone willing to trade. They shared cultural exchanges and scientific knowledge. They attended council meetings and participated in diplomatic discussions. They smiled constantly. They were polite to everyone. They never made threats or demands. But no one forgot what had happened to the Draconian fleet. No one could explain it, and no one was willing to risk finding out. Admiral Daniel had served humanity for 63 years by the time his body finally failed. He was 91 years old, still sharp in mind but broken in body, confined to a medical bed in a private facility that existed in no public records. The doctors told him he had days left, perhaps hours, but he was not afraid. He had done his duty. He had protected his. He had watched over humanity from the shadows while they grew and prospered and spread across the stars. Whatever happened next was not his burden to carry. His final visitor was a young woman in a naval uniform, with dark hair and serious eyes that reminded him of someone he had known long ago. She introduced herself as Lieutenant Cole, newly graduated from the Naval Academy, assigned to her first posting aboard the USS Vigilant. "You are great-granddaughter," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Nodded. "She died 3 years ago. She spoke of you often near the end. She said you were the finest officer she ever commanded." Daniel smiled weakly. She was being kind. I was just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The real heroes were the scientists, the engineers, the people who spent their lives in darkness so that the rest of us could live in light. Sat beside his bed and took his hand. Her grip was warm and strong, full of the vitality that had long since abandoned his own flesh. "I have read the classified histories. I know what my great-grandmother did. I know what you did. I know about Site 7 and the array and the weapon that saved us all." "Then you know that the secret must be kept," Daniel replied. "The galaxy can never learn the truth. They must continue to wonder. They must continue to fear. That fear is our greatest protection." "I understand." Daniel studied her face for a long moment. He saw determination there, and intelligence, and something else that he recognized from his own reflection decades ago. A willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause greater than oneself. "The universe holds threats far greater than the Draconians," he said slowly. "We have detected signals from species that make the Empire look like children playing with toys. They have not noticed us yet, but one day they will. And when that day comes, humanity must be ready." Squeezed his hand gently. "We will be ready, I promise you." Daniel closed his eyes and let out a long breath. He believed her. He had to believe her. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. He died that night peacefully, with a smile on his weathered face. Dr. Price had passed away a decade earlier, her secrets carried on by a new generation of scientists who had never known anything except the underground life. Site 7 had expanded into a vast complex, its research programs pushing the boundaries of physics in directions that the galaxy could not imagine. New weapons had been developed. New defenses had been constructed. Earth was no longer merely protected. It had become the most dangerous world in the known universe. Ambassador Gregory Palmer, grandson of the legendary Colonel Palmer, represented humanity at the Galactic Council for over 30 years. He listened politely as alien species discussed trade agreements and territorial disputes. He smiled when they made subtle threats. He offered reasonable compromises that somehow always favored human interests. His father had taught him the importance of patience. His grandfather had taught him the importance of sacrifice. His species had taught him the importance of keeping secrets. The council members had learned an important lesson during those 50 years. Humanity was not primitive. Humanity was not simple. Humanity was patient in a way that no other species seemed capable of understanding. They had spent decades preparing their defenses, hiding their true capabilities behind a facade of weakness and friendliness. And when the moment came, they had acted with devastating precision. No one wanted to discover what other secrets they might be hiding. Lieutenant Cole received her commission aboard the USS Vigilant on a bright spring morning in Geneva. She stood in formation with her fellow graduates, listening to speeches about duty and honor and service. She thought about her great-grandmother, who had given the order that saved humanity. She thought about Admiral Daniel, who had spent his life watching over Earth from the shadows. She thought about all the unnamed heroes who had sacrificed everything for a secret that the galaxy could never know. The universe was vast and dangerous. Species rose and fell like waves on an endless ocean. Empires conquered and crumbled and were forgotten. But humanity had proven that it could survive, that it could protect itself, that it would do whatever was necessary to ensure that its children had a future. As she walked toward her new ship, passed beneath the inscription carved above the Academy's main entrance. It was a quote from an ancient human general, words that had taken on new meaning after the destruction of the Draconian fleet. If you want peace, prepare for war. Humanity had prepared for 78 years before the first test came. They had continued preparing for 50 years afterward. The black sites still operated in secrecy. The scientists still worked on new technologies. The Guardians still watched the borders of human space. Earth would never be caught off guard again. In the vast darkness between stars, humanity waited and smiled and kept its secrets close. The galaxy thought they were friendly. The galaxy thought they were harmless. The galaxy did not understand that the smile was a mask, worn to hide something ancient and terrible, something that every human carried in their blood. The will to survive, the ability to adapt, the capacity for violence that exceeded anything the universe had ever produced. The Draconians had learned this lesson too late. The rest of the galaxy would learn it eventually. Cole looked up at the stars and made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever threats emerged from the endless void, she would be ready. Humanity would be ready. They always were. And that was the truth behind the destruction of the Draconian fleet. Not just a weapon of unimaginable power, not just decades of secret preparation, but something deeper, something fundamental to the human spirit. The absolute refusal to accept extinction. The universe could throw anything it wanted at Earth. Humanity would endure. Humanity would survive. Humanity would smile and trade and cooperate and wait. And if anyone ever threatened them again, humanity would remind them why the Draconian fleet left no survivors and sent no signals. The truth was simple. Humans were the monsters that other monsters feared. And they always would be.